Good evening, everyone. I'm Renee Montagne, and I will be in the center guide tonight through some of the most beautiful photographs you will ever see. I'm thrilled that you can join NPR and Politics and Prose Bookstore to celebrate the release of Pictures on the Radio. That's the new book of photojournalist David Gilkey's work. You know, it's a really beautiful book. It contains essays from NPR colleagues who traveled with David. That was always a special gift if you could entice him to come along. The word hellish comes up often when talking about David, as in where he was willing to go for a story: wars, pestilence, disasters. Also the words humor and humanity, as in what he found wherever he went. Hero is not so obvious. None of his colleagues would ever use that expression. He would laugh if he thought anybody was saying that about him. But he really was, and he was in the best sense, for his deep commitment to connecting through his pictures the people who saw them to a world they wouldn't know and urgently needed to. That's how we saw it. Now, there's lots to see and speak of this evening, and I'd like to welcome now two longtime colleagues just with us tonight: NPR correspondent Quil Lawrence, who covers veterans, and Getty staff photographer based in Washington, D.C., photographer Chip Somodevilla, not just colleagues, either of them, Chip and Quil, they're dear friends. And so right now, I'd like both of you to tell us how you met David.
Sure. So, I met David in Afghanistan in 2001, winter 2001, 2002. And I would see him all over those places, Iraq and Afghanistan, for the next 15 years. And I got to know him a lot better when he came over to NPR and started working with us. And we got to do some great trips together. And he helped me design the beat that I work now, which is the covering veterans back here in the States.
I met David about the same time that Quil did in the fall, winter of 2001. That's a photo of me and David and my son, Archer. I was just a brand new hire at the Detroit Free Press, and I met David one of the days that he'd just returned from his first trip to Afghanistan following the attacks of September 11. And we started working together after the newspaper for 3 years. If there's any kind of indication as to what kind of relationship David and I had, the first outing we ever had away from work was that we went in the middle of the day, because we were both working night shifts. We went in the middle of the day and saw a matinee of Jackass, the movie. So that tells you anything about what David and I found funny and what we did together, then there you go. And we also we traveled to Iraq together for 3 months in 2003. And then we were fast and best friends from there on out.
Well, this, most people probably in this Zoom call, although I've seen a couple who've been writing and saying they have met David and they know David, but for those who didn't have a chance to meet him ever personally, we wanted to share, of course, his story and his pictures from his years now at this point at NPR. Again, all from Pictures on the Radio. And we'd like to let you have a feel for him now. We're going to hear him throughout this presentation, but why don't we take a listen to how David describes sort of arriving at NPR.
How do you get pictures on the radio? I mean, I get it. I'm a photographer that works at a radio station, but it's been an absolutely natural fit to work with NPR reporters and to put together their pieces with what we do.
When candidate Karzai stepped out of the helicopter, he rushed by in a cloud of dust and security, arm in arm with the sponsor of this rally, Mansour Naderi.
The stories I've gotten to work on, working for NPR, have been the best I've ever been able to work on in my life.
Well, I'll say, Chip, you're
How do
the
you get
person who
pictures on the radio?
you're a person who really knows how to answer that question. How do you get pictures on the radio? I think amazingly, in 2007, when David arrived, that was an odd idea. I mean, we took our own photographs, and then there was a visuals department, and we had a really fine photographer there already, but really it wasn't a regular thing to do. And there was not the web the way it is now, a big, great place to put the pictures.
That's right. Yeah. When David first arrived at NPR, it was part of a larger push by NPR to try to push a greater and more comprehensive coverage of news. So David was originally hired as a videographer and a still photographer. He was pretty intimidated when he first came to NPR. He felt like well, he was intimidated also by the caliber of people he was working with. He came to me shortly after starting at NPR. He said, "Chip, there are people who work there who have PhDs in the subjects they cover." I was like, "Yeah, well, you know," and but he was also, you know, he wasn't sure how he was going to be received, and sometimes he felt like, you know, he wasn't always going to be received well. But I think that through his persistence and through the amazing quality of his work and his unique vision, he was able to endear himself to pretty much everyone there at NPR. And the proof was in the pudding also. I mean, within a couple of years of him coming to NPR in Washington, he swept the White House News Photographers Association Awards, and NPR was on the map as a visual powerhouse thanks to David.
Yeah, you know, I realize we haven't told the story behind, you know, the pictures on the radio, which is his mom's idea for the title, but it's because he got that question so much. How do you get pictures on the radio? He came up with a pat answer for a lot of it, and people say, "Yeah, hey man, how do you get pictures on the radio?" He'd go, "If you listen really hard, you can see the picture." But David, once, I mean, you started seeing him around Iraq and Afghanistan coverage. I'm trying to remember any lengthy period of time I spent in either of those countries where I didn't run into him in those early days. And he was just part of that tribe that was doing this for the long haul. He ended up doing it longer than almost anyone, really. And he knew that to get the pictures he needed to bring that home to Americans, what was going on, he couldn't do it from a distance. Even the distance that I can with a long range directional microphone or a print writer can, he needed to get close. He used to say that his zoom lens was his feet. And you can see that, that's how close he had to get to the action to get the kind of photos that he wanted to bring home. And we can see that actually in a photo that we can bring up now from right after the earthquake in Haiti.
And he describes this, and I think we're going to
really
hear.
chaotic, and there was a fire burning, and there was gunshots going off. I heard screaming on the inside of the building, and people all came charging out, and obviously, some sort of fight had erupted inside, and this guy was determined to get in there. He just pulled this knife out from his belt, and he just looked in there, and you could hear the people yelling, and he just sort of started walking in, and it was this image just sort of encapsulated it to me, all right, here we go. What's the future going to be?
There's one more character in that photo that I think David, nothing he did was by accident. And if you look at it,
it was really chaotic.
It's the dark in that photo. And this guy is staring into the abyss, and I'm sorry, but the abyss is staring right back at him. And that's what kills me about that photo.
And that photo is a real, whoa, clutch your neck kind of scary photo too, because you don't really know what's going on. I mean, it would seem to an outsider like myself a very hard, difficult picture to take. Mainly just to be there is difficult and frankly quite scary. Look at that knife. But Chip, for you, one thing that's interesting to me as well, to I think many of us who see these photos, is is ones that look in a weird way like we could do them ourselves, but you can't. You just know you can't. But like, for instance, here's a photo coming up right now. That is a photo that's simple. It seems innocent. It seems like snap the camera, and I know that's not true, but I'd like you to tell me all how not true that is.
Sure. Yeah. This
I
is
mean, as a photographer,
yeah,
you
yeah.
see other things in this picture.
Sure, sure. I see what's there. I see what's not there, and I've had the luxury of being able to look at all of David's photographs through the editing process on this book. So I've seen the hundreds of pictures that precede this one frame and the hundreds of pictures afterward, and so I start to see his thought process. With this particular picture, David, it was May of 2011. And he was on patrol with Marines from patrol base fires in the Sangin Valley in the Helmand province. And he had been marching on patrol with these Marines all day long, from sunup to sundown. And it got to about 120 degrees in the middle of the day when this picture was taken. He'd been marching through waist deep water and canals, climbing up over berms, moving through poppy fields, as the Marines were interacting with locals. And of course, whenever a journalist or a Marine or someone comes into an environment that they're unfamiliar with, there's almost always kids coming out. Kids will come out and see you to find out what's going on, what's interesting. And David saw this girl standing in the field. She wasn't as close as some of the kids in previous frames. She held her distance and kind of appeared to float there in and among the poppies. David was a big fan of fast lenses, which means these are lenses that take photographs using a paper thin aperture. And he liked using these lenses because it was a way for him to demand that your attention be paid to one particular thing in the frame. It also gives the image quality kind of something painterly, and it almost appears like it's three-dimensional. The foreground and background drop off into this kind of smear of paint, and he brings you right into the subject. And David, I think, saw this field, he saw the sky, he saw the girl, and it clicked for him. It was a moment that spoke to him about the circumstances, about the story he was working on, which was poppy production and how the government was trying to steer farmers away from it, but how important it was to their livelihoods. And David was thinking about all of these things all at once, all the time. He was always striving to capture that moment that could tell the story with one, in this case, 600th of a second.
That was the lens. I mean, that
was the shutter speed. Yeah, with the miracle of digital photography, I can see all his settings and lenses and cameras.
Well, you mentioned in a way, I think you said, if not, you implied like a painting. Mm-hmm. I mean, that looks like a painting. This photograph that has just come up absolutely looks like a painting. Mm-hmm. And of course, we know with David's work, he was a journalist. None of this is arranged, or none of this. He's finding this. He's catching it, and he has this incredible skill. But also, these don't seem to be easy pictures unless you're doing it 24 hours a day, sort of thing. But here's several more. I think we're going to see a couple, three that would have come from the same, mm-hmm. approximately same day. I mean, the same place, the same area.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's part of the reason why David really liked working in Afghanistan and in other countries, because it allowed him to completely immerse himself mentally, physically, spiritually into the story. It allowed him to be on point and constantly looking for images, whether that was, soldiers at rest, or in this case, this is a light moment where a special forces operator, at the invitation of some locals, that invited him to jump onto the back of this donkey. And so, David knows a moment when he sees it. You don't have to hit him over the head for him to see it, but this was a great moment, and it was a wonderful opportunity to show the interaction and to have some fun. But again, David is using this camera and lens setup that he had such affinity for, and it makes it also look, a humorous moment, but also just a beautiful moment. And the same with this. It's just, he was always looking at the light. He was always looking at the composition, but also that was all just writing right on top of the story. The story was always of paramount importance. It was about the danger. It was about the risk. It was about the warfighter. And David, he could balance all of that in his head all at the same time, and deliver something that is unforgettable.
You know, it is true, and we've seen, you know, happily some of the pictures that involve civilians, because Afghanistan turned out to be David's big project. I know he went back at least every year, if not, I think sometimes more. I would be in Kabul, and I would pretty much, since once he first arrived, he would always be there at some point. And I was going every year the last few years. So he embedded, and this is something, Quil, you'll really be able to speak to, he embedded often with not just US forces, but also not so often, but he did with Afghan forces. Though he had a special, and I love this because my dad was a career Marine. So he especially had a soft spot for Marines, if you can put it like that. He just really, in fact, at one point, some people were saying, come on, David, some of our Afghan friends, but colleagues, people we work with, translators. I remember one of them, Najib, finally said it to him once, just why don't you just go join the Marines? You like it so much. But talk about that, Quil. I mean, because.
Yeah, well, you know, there was he blended right in, and he had so much respect for the grunts, really, people who were, I mean, he would go in and do embeds with Tom Bowman, our Pentagon correspondent, who would get the big picture with the most important people in the country and really see it all. And then David would usually stick around and just go and find the crappiest little spot he could to find the guy who was having just the worst time of it. And that was sort of his reward for having done the other thing. I don't know, but I mean, we can listen to him talking about that. He spent a lot of time in Helmand province, which for the Marines was just a very historic battleground. So let's listen to that.
These things start with a crack. It's someone shooting at you. It sounds very different. I'm sure most people have been around a weapon when it's fired. It's a very, very different noise when it's being fired at you. The first thing is that everybody is in a ditch or on the ground and trying to get as low as possible. But I just sort of move with them and copy their actions. Short of shooting a weapon, I'm shooting a camera instead.
And that picture at the end with him, there we go, him kneeling on a.
Yeah, this was a particular patrol he went on with some Marines. It was supposed to be a one-day patrol, and the group that he was with got separated from the rest of their unit and from all of their gear. And what was supposed to be one day, and they brought maybe supplies for a short walk, was an 8-day march.
I'll tell you just real quickly from the other end of it, as I was hosting Morning Edition, that that it was a long 8 days for us in a sense that he was in communication, and but he was in a world where he was in the thick of it. I mean, he was right in the thick of it. And the thing at the time was nobody understood whether he went only with his toothbrush or that he had only a toothbrush with him. But they had nothing. They had nothing.
Yeah, and you can see in that photo, he and the other Marines are sacked out around him. He was sleeping on a piece of cardboard that they found in a village along the way. I mean, he said when this photo was taken, it was sort of his hardest, one of his roughest times ever.
Well, you, both of you, Quil and also Chip, you spent a lot of time with David, which was always, as I said earlier, a gift. I'll say something, and I just thought of when we were doing this, actually. David and I once were sitting around talking, and he and I were comparing notes because he'd been in South Africa when I was in South Africa. We never met because I didn't always know the photographers, and they were out there. But it just occurred to me now that we talk about doing this for a long time, there was a township war going on, and quite a deadly thing. Photographers were killed, not in that war, but photographers were killed in South Africa at the point that he was, I mean, journalists were, but they were always photographers. They all did the same thing with their feet. You know, they got right up to the picture. So I didn't know him then, but you guys have known each other for ages. I mean, each of you have known David for ages. Talk to us about what kind of person he was, because I mean, the thing about David was everybody pretty much loved him. Our friends in Afghan have adopted him. They were devastated when he was killed, and he was sort of gruff, but it was sort of fake gruff, as one of our colleagues wrote in one of the essays, kind of the fake gruff thing. Like, I'll come with you, but it better be good, kind of stuff. I don't care, take a chip, you're smiling. Let me try you here.
Sure. Well, yeah, he was a tough, he had this outward appearance, sort of, I've heard him described or compared to kind of like Stone Cold Steve Austin. You know, he had this shaved head, and you saw from some of the pictures that we've already shown, you know, he could give you a stare that would turn you to stone. But really underneath all of that, he was a very warm and happy and friendly and loving guy. And I remember we had known each other for about a year and a half. And finally, one day, I don't know what prompted it, he kind of turned to me and he says, you know, Chip, you don't have to call me Gilkey anymore. You can just call me David. And I was like, whoa, you know, we've reached something here. This is a special point. I don't have to call him, because everybody called him Gilkey.
Everybody called him Gilkey.
Yeah, because that was what he looked like. That's what he was, Gilkey, you know? And so, but he would, and as a testament to this, he had friends all over the world and all over the country. When David did die, the family requested that his ashes be taken to the places that meant the most to him. And so friends from all over the world volunteered to spread his ashes. And his ashes are, Renee, going back to what you're saying, some of his ashes are spread there in South Africa, and some in Rwanda, some in Oregon, where he's from, in Portland, in the mountains of Colorado. So all of the places that were important and special to him, and all the people who were important and special to him, he was just, he had always had a deep impact on people's lives, and it was his kindness. Yeah.
I sent some of those ashes to a bunch of his good friends in Afghanistan, and they took him up to the Panjshir Valley north of Kabul, where, you know, David had gone, and with a bunch of us, you know, jumped into the freezing river there, which is a really fast moving river. And we'd had a lot of picnics up there, a lot of great times, but his Afghan friends were joking. They were going to throw his ashes in the river up there. And then they realized, oh no, it might flow into Pakistan. Okay, so we're going to put him here in the, you know, looking up at the mountains. That would be better. But I think he connected with them. I mean, you can read in the bio, in the short biography we've written of him in the book, about, you know, the hard times that David had growing up. I mean, his mother said that he was living so fast, she didn't think he was going to live past 25. And, you know, he took care of himself and sort of set himself on a slightly less risky path. But I think the fact that he had been down very low meant that he could connect with these friends, and particularly in Afghanistan, the friends there just connected with him in a bond that was really family. And, you know, they were just waiting for him to come back on each trip.
Yeah.
Quil, you said that they would greet each other every time.
Yeah. Yeah, you see this. It was like, because when he first started going there, he was 35, and these guys were all young, and they would end up wrestling like a bunch of teenage boys. And it would still happen. Like, you know, 15 years later, he'd show up at the NPR bureau, and some of the guys would be there, and all sorts of sort of staid and responsible people would look on as these bunch of guys started wrestling on the floor. And you just have to sort of,
They sort of also punch each other. one of Najib especially, they turned instantly into kids. He'd give them a punch and then he'd give them another punch.
They all said they thought of him as an American with an Afghan heart. And, and he really, he was connected to that country and he felt like he owed them something, I think.
Well, he was, I think, even in the book, many of these great photos and ungettable photos in Afghanistan, especially are of Marines or soldiers or special forces. But I remember in 2009, the election was happening and he had come to Kabul and he was doing, he loved doing this kind of stuff. He did portraits of the presidential candidates, each one, and you'd see him stand there and all of a sudden, I've said this to Chip, but also you'd see his face, because again, there's David the toughie and there's David the photographer. There's even David dashing around being tough as a photographer, but in this case, he would look at people, men and women, a warlord in one case that I didn't know quite how bloodthirsty he was until later, and then it really hit me, that he would look at them and his face would kind of exude a calmness that would sort of communicate to them, and their faces would then settle in a certain way. I stood once over his shoulder and saw it, it was almost like magic. And so there he was doing that. And we'd done different things, but we'd done some more like local shots and local things for me, the stories I was doing. And then I had to go back and it was sort of over. I mean, the election was going to happen, but we didn't really need to be there for that because it wasn't going to be counted for weeks and weeks and weeks. So David, just before I left, he got wind of the fact that there were going to be donkeys carrying, now this has happened before, but no, we didn't have photos of it. There were going to be donkeys carrying to the furthest reaches, carrying ballots on their backs to the furthest reaches of Afghanistan. Right now, this is an area of Afghanistan in the upper northeast far. It's like a little handle almost going into China. And it is what you could call the Afghanistan of Afghanistan. It's that much in the middle of nowhere. And yet they needed to get the ballots there, and it had been a bad year, especially there was lots of rains and snow and runoff the previous winter. And so as you can see, there's this water running thick and fast. Lots of bridges had been knocked out. And so he was in this, anyway, he got so he knew it was going to be an adventure and also something really hard to do, but it was going to take him away for as long as he was with those donkeys. So it was going to be like 2 or 3 weeks. And Washington wasn't all that happy because there's always something else to take a picture of. But David was so intent on it that he just managed to talk them into it. And it, of course, turned out to be the most amazing pictures. But you're going to see some of these photographs that he sent back. And then right now we can hear, over these photographs, a little clip, because I turned around once I was back and interviewed him about this trip and about these photographs. And I'll say one thing really quick. I listened back to it, and I never listen back to anything really I do much. And what I was asking, I was describing the photographs. And if you want to know about photographs on the radio, literally, these were on the web, but I was describing his photographs, and his photographs are so vivid. I was able, listening back, I could see it myself. I realized how you could see it. There was a donkey going over a bridge and there's water rushing under it. And David, so in this case, we're picking up with a moment which I talked about how even the trucks couldn't get through to give the boxes to the donkey caravans. And this is what he said.
In a lot of places, they haven't rebuilt the bridges, and so they're having to, go down into essentially the water and go miles out of the way to get the donkeys across. It's an incredible effort, and it started about 2 weeks ago in getting this material out to the places where it would be possible to conduct the election.
And what then is the mood among the voters where you are?
This is sort of the biggest event every 5 years here, and this morning I got up and I walked down. It was an animal clinic that was built a few years ago turned into a polling place. And I mean, people were queuing up at 6 o'clock in the morning. They were thrilled. I mean, everybody was sort of sitting around the front of this polling place talking and having tea and waiting their turn to get in to vote. It was really exciting.
And you just can picture David, who would have at that moment been easily nobody'd ever seen him sort of guy, all by himself, and I'm sure making friends and drinking tea. The book has, and I'd like to say, everybody, I hope you're all sending away for this, buying it, Politics and Prose. This book has so much brilliant material in it, and there was so much brilliant material to go through to make this book. Obviously a big challenge, but it turned out, and I'm going to turn to you, Chip, it turned out to be a bigger challenge than it even needed to be, I think, but than you could have imagined, right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, yes, it was a big challenge. But what made the challenge a lot easier was working with Ariel Zambelich, picture editor from NPR, who was there at NPR at the time when David died. And she is, without question, the most organized, and her mind, her ability to help us organize David's complex and chaotic archives, and then to stick with the project. She did as much editing on this book as I did. And we sat side by side for hours, days, weeks, months, plowing through these pictures and trying to disassemble and reassemble them in a way that made sense. David had a very, as you kind of picked up from this conversation, David was most comfortable living out of a suitcase, right? And that was also reflected in the way that he took care of his photo archive. He had these small portable hard drives that he would take along with him when he was overseas, and he would fill them up with data, and then he would stow them or leave them at home and then buy another one and fill it up. And he kind of did the same thing with his laptops. He would get a laptop and then he would fill it up full of data, and then NPR would buy him a new laptop. So then he'd take the new laptop and take all the data off the old one and put it inside the new one. And then he would use that for a few years. And then he'd get a new laptop and he'd take everything out of the two previous and put it inside the new one. So you had this kind of Russian nesting doll of laptops. And that was where he kept all of his pictures. And it was chaos, redundancies and repetitions, and some were in black and white, some were in color. So Ariel and I, with the help of some others at NPR, we slowly but carefully worked through these pictures, made order out of chaos, and then eventually we're able to find the very best files to use for making this book. And then that's where Ken Geiger, who was the colorist for the book, he also made these pictures just sing. They're absolutely beautiful. They're the best that David's pictures have ever looked. And I'm only sorry he's not here to see it. He would be impressed by his own pictures all over again, I think, if he were to see it.
Quil, we do want to let people know a little bit about what happened to David, and I want you to tell us, because you know the story.
Sure. Yes, I mean, David had always said that he was going to keep covering Afghanistan. I mean, he would kind of warn that, as this war gets less and less on the front page and the American forces shrink down and it's mostly special forces, that we're just not going to have any idea what's going on. And the press won't have any access, and Americans won't know what's being done over there. And it was his commitment to go and ground truth it. And when Americans said that they were going to step back and let the Afghans take the lead, he went to see that. And when they said they were going to shut down bases, he went and took pictures of, have they shut down the bases? Yes, okay, they have. I'm there, I've seen it. And that's what he was doing. At this point, it was Afghan forces that were in the lead back in Helmand province, where he'd spent so much time. And so he and Zabiela Tamana, our Afghan colleague, were traveling with Afghan forces when they were ambushed by the Taliban and killed. And he had been saying that he would keep going back. He had been starting to transition home, but he just felt a commitment, I think, to his Afghan friends and to his American public to keep on documenting it. And even the last photos he took showed that, yes, these American bases had shut down and Afghans were taking the lead. We can look at some of those photos. The American soldiers would go on something called a zombie run to these old bases and pick up old gear and air conditioners and things like that. And when he heard that, he had to go on one. So we can see those last few, some of the photos he took on that last trip here.
It was a shock to everyone, and a lot of people, it turned out, had known him. We knew he knew people, but people reacted quite strongly, and lots of people sent in beautiful memories. Towards the end, he was working. He didn't realize it was going to be his end, but in the end, he was working with a new project, and that was coming out of these years working, covering these wars. And Chip, you had obviously, I'm sorry, not Chip, Quil, you obviously, that's your beat. And you were with him in several of these trips that he made. Do you want to we want to give a little bit time for questions. So, but why don't you take us along for what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, this was, so David and I had sort of schemed to do this beat that would just cover veterans who were returning home at the time to a terrible economy after having spent all this time abroad, and how would they feel at home in America? And it really was a question for David as well. But he got right into it, and it was such a natural fit for him. This is a shot from a bunch of disabled veterans who were climbing Half Dome in Yosemite. And David actually interrupted my vacation once to say, Quil, there's this trip these vets are covering. We have to go. We're going to climb up the Half Dome, and we'll interview them from halfway up the cliff. And of course, it was a brilliant assignment. He took such gorgeous images. And in a way, him covering veterans trying to fit in back at home, it was very obvious that he was also shifting. And he was starting to find a way to come home himself. He was facing a lot of the same issues they were. He was carrying a lot of trauma. He felt more at home over there than he did back here. But he was turning his gaze towards, how am I going to come home? What's my reentry? What's my sort of retrograde redeployment look like? And that is where he was turning, even though he was still, making those trips to Afghanistan when he died.
And that was his the camera he had the day he died. It's on display. I know display is not quite the right word, but it's like a shrine in a sense, in the best sense at NPR. We have a few more minutes, and we're trying to hold a few minutes open for some questions and answers. And Ali, our producer, is going to forward us those questions. But before we start, just let me take a really important moment to acknowledge and thank some special people attending tonight: Dan and Phyllis Epstein and Kay Buxbaum. Their generous support in establishing the David Gilkey and Zabihullah Tamana Memorial Fund, and also NPR's international journalist, is so, we are so thankful for that. And it will not only fund what our journalists do, it will keep them safe while providing news of the world for audiences back home. So I can't see you, that's how it is, but I know you're there, and we at NPR really, really thank you. And I think all of our listeners and audiences at NPR would really want to thank you. So in terms of questions and answers, or questions rather, we'll have hopefully some answers for you. Ali, have you gotten any?
Sure. So the first question is from Susan Vavrick. She's wondering how, out of all of David's amazing photos, did you pick the cover photo that we landed on? And I'll bring that up in just a moment.
Yeah. So Susan, full disclosure, was our copy editor on this book and worked at NPR for many, many years. Thank you, Susan. And there are a lot of other people I should mention, a lot of NPR correspondents who wrote copy for this book and so many people who helped out. But let me get to the question. So there were a couple of alternative covers. This one, again, it's one of those pictures that speaks so much. We had originally gone with, Ali, will you bring up the dust storm? This is one of my favorite photos of David's of all time. If you can look, sort of cut that screen in half in your, with your hand, folks at home, you'll see that on the right-hand side, that's where we're going to put the title, and it looks so good against the dust cloud. And then what I love about this photo is, I mean, it's all this massive storm, but then you look and you follow along the wall there, and you see there's a little guy there, and he is about to get screwed. He is about to be eating dust. And that guy, for me, is David. I mean, it wasn't him, obviously. David was taking the picture. And after he took this picture, there was no communication for, I don't know, several days because of the dust. But this is where he wanted to be. He wanted to be with a guy who just had it the worst. And this is the day he took that picture. The problem with this as a cover is that if you only look at half of it, you have no idea what it is. And that's the front of the book. So it's like, what is it? It's a bunch of dust. So Chip, I also wanted the Haiti photo with the knife possibly as a cover. But Chip, why don't you tell us why wiser and more photographically inclined people prevailed in the cover we have?
Well, we had a lot of discussion about this because also, this is a book of work by our dear friend who had passed away. And so I'm a big fan of photography books, and I kind of went back and looked at books that were made after photographers had passed away, and a lot of them used, instead of just trying to settle on one particular image, a lot of them used that would just be like a black cover with bold type, and so that's kind of where the dust storm would have fit in for us, but it just wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to grab people quite the way that we wanted it to. And so then, because we were going in another direction, because we were going in a direction where we wanted to have a picture, then Quil and Ariel and our brilliant book designer, Bonnie Bryant, we just had we had back and forth. We had lots of different ideas about lots of different concepts. But then we eventually settled on this because it's such a striking image. And the idea is that I wanted you we all wanted you to stop in your tracks. And we wanted you to be drawn in. We wanted it to create some questions. We wanted it to create some excitement. And this image of Lance Corporal Espinosa, wiping the sweat from his eyes. And this was actually, the fun thing is this picture was shot during the same patrol on the same day as the Poppy Girl picture, which is on the back of the book. So like I said before, David was in the zone that day. He made some amazing pictures in that 24 hours in the Sangha Valley. But we love the mud brick wall. We love the gesture. We love how the Marine kind of just flowed into the background and became one with Afghanistan, which we also thought spoke to how David approached the subject. And that's where we went. And I really love it. I think it's a great cover.
All right, our next question is from Shafi Sharifi, and I think you all sort of touched on this when you were talking about where David's ashes were spread, but he asks, did David connect with people of other countries in the same way he connected with Afghans?
Shafi, also, we should say, he worked with NPR for many years. He was a dear, dear friend of David's, and he and his brother, one of his brothers, Najib, wrote a beautiful essay for the final chapter of this book. And so, hi, Shafi.
Well, you'd have to say he connected with you, Shafi, because Shafi and Najib were two of his best friends. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hard to match that with any other country.
I mean, I think, in Iraq, David had a passion to cover that story, but because of his appearance, he looked like he was an American soldier, and it got dangerous that way in Afghanistan eventually, but that in Iraq, it happened much sooner and for a much longer period of time, where David just finally, he wasn't allowed out of the Humvee. It was too dangerous for someone who looked like him to be walking around Iraq, and he couldn't take the kind of photos he wanted. He ended up doing a series of photos framed from the window of a Humvee, because that was all he was able to do. So I know he connected with a lot of people around the world, but I mean, Afghanistan was very close to his heart, as Shafi knows.
I know a couple of the guys who were his guides and translators in Iraq are also on tonight, and yeah, they would second what you had to say. Sometimes they had some real adventures with David in places like Sadr City and other places where life and death became very real concepts, very stark. Yeah, but he loved Afghanistan, and you know, it's a beautiful country. It's got beautiful people, beautiful landscapes, and all of it is under immense pressure all the time. You know, where life and death are very vivid, and that combination it just fed David's soul.
I had one extra thing too, that David is very funny, and some of the most amusing and fun days I've ever had in my life is spending a day in the car, because you would always be gone all day long, and everybody's squished in together, and there would be David and either Shafi or Najib and one of our producers, often Jim Wildman, and all crushed in together. And because David would be, the guys were funny, all of them. I wasn't. I was a good audience though, and they were funny and be laughing. And I think there's something about humor in Afghanistan. I've always thought that there's a sense of it's dry humor, and it's also edgy, and people laugh at themselves, and it's just something that's very relatable to an American generally, I think, and it especially worked with David Gilkey.
I should add, just in fairness to my Iraqi friends, so you don't get mad. The photos in this book were just from NPR, from his time with NPR, which for a bunch of reasons, it was a task we could actually handle in, what was it, 4 years? Anyway, so that's why there are no Iraq photos in here. David wasn't working for NPR when he was in Iraq.
The next question, and I'm going to combine two, one from Kainaz Amaria, who is one of David's old photo editors, and then one from Beverly Sloan. And they both were wondering about how good David was with kids and learning a little bit more about that, and also his coverage of women in Afghanistan over the time that he was there. So any sort of thoughts on women and children, rather than just the straightforward, male military coverage, would, I think, be appreciated.
I could say one thing, may I say, and you guys also would probably understand this. It wasn't so easy to take David into almost any environment where there were a lot of women. We sometimes couldn't take our translators in, and they had to be in the other room or something, like that. I mean, but if you're Afghan, it's a different story. So it's not like he never interacted with him at all. Quite the opposite. You'll see in some of these pictures, there's some lovely pictures, but he's not, it isn't the obvious thing that's the one thing that didn't work very well. And again, it's not that he never took any pictures, but for a woman unveiled, it wouldn't make much sense. So, but Quil, you might have to do both. Yeah. Chip, you guys might have something.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Ariel, who worked on this with us, would point out was that he was in an almost all-female team at NPR on the visuals team, he and John Poole, and he fit right in with them, and I think they had a great working relationship. And he would also defer to them in a way, just sort of handing them his whole hard drive to just come back and drop it off, dust covered in dust, whatever. That's how I picture it. Yeah, I mean, so like you say, Renee, and for him to cover women in Afghanistan, civilian women, was very hard. We did a great series on women veterans back here in the States, and he took gorgeous photos for that.
And children, I don't know, he was great with children, by the way. Yeah. You saw some of it. No, he was good with children. I mean, I don't know what to say better than just, if they were around him, he knew how to talk to them and stuff. He wasn't scary. I mean, he was, he had a charisma around kids. Oh.
It makes me wish I have a few great pictures of him in Afghanistan with children, as well as children here in the US. He certainly had a child's heart, that's for sure, and would always, I think he would much rather go outside and play with the kids than sit around talking with adults a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add, I know we're, as we often do, we're remembering all of the fond memories of a dear friend. You know, he had his dark moments. I think one of his, the last time he visited my family with my young daughter, he was, you know, he was trying to turn on the charm, but he was struggling, honestly. He was struggling with coming home from war and all of the stuff he kept putting himself through to do this coverage. And he was a little grumpy and a little dark, not fake grumpy, real grumpy. I mean, and all of us who knew him knew that could happen too. But you know, even in that, he was trying his you know, his fake grumpy with my 2-year-olds. Are you mean mugging me, baby? She didn't. I don't think she quite got a sense of humor yet. She would now.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to combine another 2 questions just because they're sort of related. One from Sebastiano Tomata and one from Eamon Carney. Basically, they're asking about how conflict becomes addictive when you're covering it. It can be, you know, an adrenaline rush to be in these environments. Did David ever expand on that and why he felt such a rush and was, you know, so drawn to those things? And do you think he would still be going to Afghanistan if he hadn't been killed?
This is a good transition. I want to say Eamon Carney, David was an Uncle David to Eamon Carney also. He was a kid that knew David for most of his life as well, a son of 2 of David's very good friends. So yeah, it's yeah, the transition is hard. Like a lot of people who saw a lot of war and conflict, David was not you know, without his scars, and in fact, you know, he was working through a lot of that. The last time I saw David in person was Mother's Day 2016. And he was at my house and we grilled out in the backyard and spent the day visiting. My mom was actually in town, so he and my mom actually visited for a long time. And he told me that he was coming to a new place where he was getting his life back in balance. And he was moving back to Washington from Portland. And he told me that, you know, it had been the first time in years that he had really felt like he was back in the groove and that he was himself again. And it was a very busy time for him too. In 2016 alone, he went to India, he went to Sudan, he was back in Afghanistan, and yeah, he was back in the groove, and that made his death even harder for me and for the people who knew him closely, because we knew that there were a lot more good days ahead. There were a lot more great pictures to come. And that made it extra hard.
The next question comes from Linda Epstein, another previous photo editor of David's. She's wondering if there are photos in the book from other of David's travels and any from the trip with David Green. And I think Linda will be pleased to know the answer.
Yeah. So there are amazing, these chapters are each arranged from an assignment or a trip or, you know, something covered a long time. But the nice thing is that we had a built-in writer to stick on each chapter, because there's a chapter on this amazing trip that they took across Siberia on the Trans-Siberian Railway. And David Green, former NPR host, wrote the intro to that chapter, and it's beautiful. Eric Westervelt wrote an incredibly funny near-death experience intro to the chapter about covering the war in Gaza. Claire O'Neill, who worked with David on a bunch of stories domestically, wrote a beautiful intro to his stories about work in the US. Jason Bobian wrote 2 different ones, because I think Jason probably traveled with him the most. You might have heard some of these people talking about the book on our air in the last couple of days. Julie McCarthy in India, Tom Bowman and Graham Smith, who did so many embeds with David, the Afghan boys who wrote the last chapter in the book. Am I missing anybody? It'd be unforgivable if I missed anyone. And David Gilkey, his mother, of course, wrote a beautiful a beautiful introduction as well.
Elida was the real driving force behind this book, by the way. Her and her husband, Dick, who unfortunately passed away shortly after David, they came up with the title of the book. And this was their way of celebrating their son's memory. They knew that a book of photography means that the work is not just there to be consumed on a 24-hour basis and then cast aside like the next day's news. They believed and understood that a book of photography means that this work is important and should be studied and should be, returned to over and over again. And they were the ones who said this book needs to be made, and then tasked Quil and I with it.
We have a couple brief sort of follow-up questions exactly on that point, Chip. Preston Racino asks what the influence of knowing Chris Hondros, the war photographer who died in Libya in 2011, what was the influence of his work, and how did that impact how the book was put together and sequenced? And in addition, did going through all the photos of David's, the thousands of photos, did that help you get any insight into his artistry and being able to make, beautiful photos from war? That second part was from Kurt Chandler.
Yeah, the beautiful book that was also published by powerHouse is called Testament, and it was assembled by Sandy Sirik, Pancho Bernasconi, and others at Getty Images posthumously for Chris, who was killed in Misrata, Libya in 2011. That book was definitely an inspiration and a template for us when we were putting this book together. He and David were friends, spent a lot of time together in Iraq. And so, yeah, they both dealt a lot with conflict, but they also did a lot of, of what you would call like features, where they would go into different places and do stories about things that were other than conflict or war. They were very similar in their souls and in their approach to photography, which is also, I might say, it's also a very pure kind of photojournalism. There's not a lot of, actually, there's no use of flash. David never used flash. He was always there to observe and never to alter the situation. And Chris was a lot the same way. So yeah, the book is that. As far as going through all of his images, David and I were really close for 15 years. And that during that time, I would edit his work all the time. And I would have him edit my work all the time. So I was already very intimately familiar with David's body of work, especially from the time that he came to NPR. And so, yeah, going back and looking at it again and again and again, it did give me some insight into him, but I still felt like, I think more than anything, it was confirming kind of what I already knew. I'd pushed him about making a book for years. And I would always say, David, we've got to do a book of your work. You're the only guy who's been there from day one. He went into Afghanistan right after 9/11, and ultimately that's where he died. And so, he had an incomparable body of work. And so I was always pushing it. You got to do a book, got to do a book. We're going to start working on the book as soon as you get back to Washington. He'd say, oh yeah, I got it. I got everything you need. It's all good. We're going to have it. We're going to do the thing. But he had no interest in doing it, So it was definitely a challenge to get him to hold still and do it. But I knew, after looking at his work for so many years, that he had an incredible body of work. And I think this book is really special. And although he would hate us sitting around talking about him for an hour, I mean, nothing would make him more uncomfortable than Renee and Quil and I sitting here talking about him. But I think that he would be proud of the book.
When Chris died, David and I were in a chopper flying back from an embed in Logar, Afghanistan. And I know that because the embed accidentally ended. The chopper didn't go where it was supposed to, and it just took us back to the big air base. And as soon as we got off, both of our phones just started popping with messages about Chris. And managed to call someone who was there in Misrata. But and Chris's death, I think, was, David knew exactly what work Chris was doing, and he knew that he was doing the same sort of work. And, it goes back to the question someone asked earlier about this. And I think there was a point where so much of your value is associated with these amazing photographs that you make in these incredible, tense conflicts. But David was starting to, I think, possibly with that example, to redefine what he was going to make matter to him. There was that going back and getting that conflict, but he was realizing that there were things he could do that would be just, and you'll see in the book, that some of his work back at home, some of his work covering veterans, some of his work in India or on the Trans-Siberian Railway, it just has every bit as much power. And he knew that, and he was turning towards that, when he died.
So we are just about out of time, but I think this group of very big and adoring David Gilkey fans and admirers would love to just hear quickly each of your favorite stories about David. If we could go maybe Quil, Chip, Renee, then Renee, have you bring us home. That would be great.
I've got too many funny stories that are all just, I don't think I could tell them without cussing.
Totally inappropriate.
Yeah, I can't. So I'm just going to say, there are a lot. But, for me, the story that lasts with me so much is just going with him in the middle of the night in a chopper into what was supposed to be a hot landing zone, and jumping off that helicopter into the unknown on a dark night where there was no moon and no stars and nothing to see by. And David had a set of night vision goggles he'd been carrying around since Iraq. And we got off the chopper, and he led me like a blind man until we were safe. And we did each other some favors over the years in tough situations, but those forge a friendship in and among all of the hilarious times that I would like to share, but they're too profane.
Renee, what do you remember best? What's your favorite time with David?
Well, it was actually, you saw earlier a photograph, we put it up, a photograph of as me standing in front of a van, and you wouldn't know this, but on my left on the left of the photograph was the driver, then there was David, then there was me, then there was Najib Sharifi. Here we go. And this is by far my favorite trip with him. We had been told that there was only going to be one Karzai rally. He was a little like Trump in that one way. The extreme opposite. He was only going to have one rally during the 2009 election. He was president. He figured that was his thing, but he wanted to go to this valley where he had many, many worshipers, really. People who were really behind him. So we were told it would be a big long afternoon, because it was pretty far away. It was about 4 hours each direction, about 5 hours each direction. And long story short, it ended up being an all-nighter where they put us all, there were only about 4 women, but there were about 20 men, reporters, and they tried to put the women in the only halfway comfortable room in the big house that, of course, nobody was expecting to stay in. And we forced them to let all the guys in too, because it was the only place there was a bathroom. And also we wanted the guys to be with us. And so it was a very long, incredible, and there's a few pictures actually in the book of that day. The kid in the white, looks like a prom tuxedo, but that was one of David's great pictures. But right there with this, we were just going back to Kabul the next afternoon. And we have just gone through this long tunnel, the longest tunnel, or was the longest tunnel once in life in the world, at the top of this great pass. And just as we emerged from the tunnel, the van, and I was sitting in the front seat, and I started watching the driver, and he's pumping very fast on the brakes, and it became very clear something was very, very wrong. So the van basically, the brakes gave out. And he managed, good for him, to pull over and somehow fix the brake lines because all the fluid had run out. But in the meantime, we walked over to where there was a river, which we could very easily have driven into instead of parking a few feet before we got there. And mostly the guys, but everyone threw rocks into the river. And it was a very beautiful, beautiful moment. We took that picture afterwards and it looks like jubilation, or who knows what it looks like. We were just really happy that we made it, basically. And but David is holding up something. It's something he found among the rocks in the picture. I've squinted at that picture. I still don't know what it is. It looks like maybe a little shell, like not a shell, not a seashell, a little shell from a bullet of some sort, you know. Yeah, those were the days we had. And so like there's many of those stories where you didn't know what was going to happen. You just went in. And I just have to say, with David there, you felt good. You were entertained under the worst circumstances. And also, you know, he was a very deep person. And so to spend time with him in those intense ways, maybe every day was like a year, you know, of knowing someone. So what about you, Chip? It was going to go to you, but I'm going to give some thanks right afterwards.
I think you should go ahead and hit thanks. I have so many stories. You know, they range, you know, because I knew David professionally and I knew him personally. He was like a brother to my wife and I. He was like an uncle to my kids. So, you know, the stories go from, you know, him sitting on the couch with my daughter when she was a toddler and him playing fart sounds on the phone and laughing his head off, you know. It goes from that all the way to, you know, one time we were at the Al Hamra Hotel in Baghdad, and it was lights out and we'd gone to sleep for about an hour, and suddenly the whole city erupted in gunfire. And so David and I had adjoining rooms and we leapt out of our beds, you know, in just our underwear, and we're running around in pitch dark and we're trying to figure out what's going on. And all we hear are guns and heavy guns and light guns. And we're running around, we're ducking, trying to stay out of the way of the windows. And we're kind of creeping over the edge of the windows, trying to figure out what's going on. And we kind of looked at each other like, yeah, this is it. You know, we're under attack and it's all over. And then eventually got word that the Iraqi national soccer team had won a game, and they were celebrating by, you know, shooting. I mean, they were shooting huge guns into the air, and we thought we were going to die, and it was just soccer. So, yeah, there are tons of stories like that. And yeah, he was the friend of a lifetime, that's for sure.
Yeah, and a great talent. So we are very happy to have that you all have joined us. I want to thank you, Politics and Prose Bookstore. I've been there many a time. I've been to many book launches there or book conversations there, and you are just the best. Powerhouse Books, our producer, Ali Prescott, and Brittany Kerfoot, you from Politics and Prose, you're here. Thank you again. I thank the store, but and I think you want to say something at just a little moment.
Yeah, I just need someone to start my video.
Oh, shame.
The joys of Zoom and technical.
That's the sec. That's my fault. Hold on.
You're good.
But well, while you're starting it, I can see when you come up. There you go.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Like Renee said, my name is Brittany Kerfoot. I'm the director of events at Politics and Prose Bookstore. And I just wanted to come on to say that we are so proud to have partnered with NPR for this event and to remember David and celebrate this beautiful book. And speaking of the book, sales have been so great that we sold out of our original stock, which is a wonderful problem to have. But don't worry, if you haven't ordered your copy yet, we have more on order right now. So they're coming to the store very soon. And I know that NPR has dropped a link in the chat for where you can get it from PNP. So please order. It's truly a beautiful, lovely book. And I just want to say again, thank you so much to NPR, and thank you to you all for supporting us and supporting your local independent bookstore. It means the world to us.
Thank you, Politics and Prose. I know David loved shopping there.
Oh.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you again, and buy the book. It's a wonderful book.
Thanks, everyone. Stay well.
Take care.